You're flying over Nazi-occupied Europe, thousands of feet in the air, watching as bombers hum across the sky sitting ducks for German fighters. But this time, they're not alone. Escorting them, a group of pilots who've been ridiculed, underestimated, and blocked at every turn. The Tuskegee Airmen. And they're about to change everything. Before they became legends, they were written off both by the enemy and their own country.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
The Nazis, operating on the delusional belief that black people were racially inferior, didn't see the Tuskegee Airmen as a threat. American military leaders weren't much better. The U.S. Army was deeply segregated. Black men were barred from many combat roles and outright discouraged from flying. But here's where the narrative takes a sharp turn. By 1941, a new training program launched in Tuskegee, Alabama. It was more of a social experiment than a show of faith. The hope, for many in power, was that it would fail. That black pilots would prove too unfit, too undisciplined, too incapable to fly. Instead, what they got were nearly 1,000 trained aviators who would go on to redefine American air combat. On July 2, 1943, First Lieutenant Charles Hall flew straight into the history books. Over Sicily, he shot down a German fighter, becoming the first black American pilot to score an aerial kill. One clean shot, and just like that, the narrative started cracking. The myth of racial inferiority, both American and Nazi-made, was being peeled back by cold, hard facts. But it wasn't just one victory. It was dozens, then hundreds. Over time, the Tuskegee Airmen destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in the sky. And that doesn't even count the hundreds more obliterated on the ground. They didn't just fight, they dominated. Precision, discipline, skill. This wasn't some underdog story of scrappy rookies getting lucky. These men were good. Trained relentlessly, they flew with unmatched efficiency and a deep sense of purpose, protecting the bombers and proving the world wrong. And oh, did they protect? When the Tuskegee Airmen escorted Allied bombers, only 27 were lost. To put that into perspective, other groups routinely saw much higher losses. These pilots became so reliable that bomber crews requested the red tails. That red paint on the tail of their planes. It became a symbol of hope, reliability, and survival. German pilots started taking notice, but by then, it was too late. In one remarkable operation, the Tuskegee Airmen shot down 3 German Mi-26 jets in a single day. For context, the Mi-262 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter. Faster, deadlier, and supposedly unstoppable. Yet 3 of them were brought down by pilots who, just a few years earlier, weren't even allowed to eat in the same mess halls as their fellow servicemen. This wasn't just about dogfights and combat records. Every mission the Tuskegee Airmen flew was a battle on 2 fronts: against the Axis in the air, and against racism on the ground. Back in the States, these men still faced segregation. Separate facilities. Separate rules. Their own military doubted them at every step. Yet they kept flying. Kept winning. Because for them, success in the air meant something much bigger on the ground. Every destroyed aircraft, every protected bomber, every mission completed was a direct challenge to the idea that race determined ability. Nazi propaganda couldn't explain it. American generals couldn't deny it. These men were flying, fighting, and outperforming without any of the institutional support given to white squadrons. And they weren't just pilots. The entire unit, from mechanics to ground crews, operated under immense pressure and limited resources. Bases like Ramitelli in Italy were often targeted, bombed, and strained to the limit. But the airmen and their teams kept the planes flying, kept the missions going. They were a machine powered by resilience. Their tactics were sharp, too. Escort missions became surgical operations. Using a 3-layer defense system, the Red Tails protected bombers with almost mathematical precision. They didn't chase glory kills, they flew to defend. That focus saved lives. Their effectiveness skyrocketed when they began flying the P-51 Mustang. With longer range and better speed, it transformed their capabilities. Suddenly, they could reach deep into enemy territory without needing to break off. With these new aircraft and their refined escort strategies, they became the elite. Still, recognition didn't come overnight. When the war ended, the Tuskegee Airmen didn't return to ticker tape parades. They went back to a country that still saw them as second-class citizens. But their legacy wasn't something anyone could bury. Over time, the numbers spoke for themselves: 112 aerial victories, hundreds of enemy aircraft destroyed, 96 distinguished flying crosses, and unwavering respect of bomber crews who knew firsthand what it meant to see those red tails in formation. Their impact rippled beyond the battlefield. In 1948, just 3 years after the war ended, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the U.S. military. That wasn't a coincidence. The Tuskegee Airmen had made the argument impossible to ignore. Talent isn't racial. Discipline, bravery, and excellence have nothing to do with skin color. The very same military that once tried to keep them out now had to follow their lead. Their story also became a spark in the broader civil rights movement. These weren't just war heroes, they were living proof that the American system had been wrong. That discrimination wasn't just cruel, it was inefficient, keeping capable people sidelined weakened the country. And nothing exposed that flaw more clearly than the airmen who outflew every expectation laid on them. In 2007, decades after the last dogfight, the Tuskegee Airmen were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. It was a long overdue recognition for men who had rewritten the rules of war and society. What started as a segregated experiment ended in undeniable legacy. The Tuskegee Airmen took every slight, every stereotype, every whispered insult and turned it into fuel. Fuel for missions. Fuel for change. Fuel for history. German pilots mocked them. American officials doubted them. The world underestimated them. And still they flew. They flew through prejudice, through enemy fire, through every invisible wall that was meant to stop them. And when they landed, they'd not only protected their country, they'd reshaped it. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that combat skill doesn't care about skin color, that excellence can't be racially profiled, that systemic barriers can be broken one mission, one battle, one victory at a time. They didn't just change the way wars are fought, they changed the way a nation sees itself. If you're still watching, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know in the comments what part of the Tuskegee story hits you the hardest. And if you want more stories that pull back the curtain on forgotten legends and epic turning points, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more where this came from. Alright, let's keep going. Because honestly, the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, we're not done yet. Not even close. Let's talk about what they were up against before they ever even left the ground. In the early 1940s, if you were a black man in America, just trying to fly a plane, let alone serve as a military pilot, was seen as a ridiculous ambition. Military studies, some even funded by the government, claimed black men lacked intelligence, courage, and physical coordination to fly. Yes, they literally paid people to publish that garbage as fact. It was so baked into the system that the very existence of the Tuskegee program was controversial. It wasn't created out of respect, it was created as a test. A quiet hope that it would fail, just to confirm all those racist assumptions. But instead of folding under pressure, the men who trained in Tuskegee, Alabama, built something extraordinary. They trained harder, flew smarter, got sharper. The bar wasn't just high, it was rigged. And they cleared it anyway. When the 332nd Fighter Group and the 99th Fighter Squadron took to the skies, they weren't just representing the United States. They were representing an entire race of people who'd been locked out, pushed aside, and written off. Their missions carried weight on every level. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their careers on the line. It would reinforce every lie being told about black Americans at home. Now imagine the pressure of knowing that every single mission is going to be dissected through the lens of racism. One mistake, blamed on race. One mechanical failure. See, they can't handle the pressure. But they didn't make excuses. They made history. Their discipline was legendary. The Red Tails were known for sticking to their bombers no matter what. Other groups would sometimes abandon their escort duties to chase enemy fighters for glory kills, and that often left the bombers vulnerable. Not the Tuskegee Airmen. They had one job: protect the payload. And they did it so well that bomber crews literally begged for them as escorts. Now that's not just about skill. That's trust. Built mission after mission. Earned, not given. And they weren't just operating under fire from the Luftwaffe, they were dealing with casual racism from their own side. White officers refusing to salute them. Separate training facilities. Disrespect in the ranks. Some bomber crews didn't even want to fly with them at first until they saw the results. Because when you watch plane after plane not get blown out of the sky, thanks to the guys with red tails on their wings, it becomes a little harder to cling to your prejudice. But even as the kill count grew, the skepticism didn't vanish overnight. It wasn't until they started flying the P-51 Mustangs that the full power of the Tuskegee program clicked into place. With the Mustangs' longer range and faster speed, the Red Tails could finally escort bombers deep into Germany. No mid-air handoffs. No gaps in protection. Just smooth, continuous coverage. That's when the numbers really started talking. Bombers under Tuskegee escort had the lowest loss rate of any group. And while everyone else was taking credit, the Red Tails were racking up kills. That single-day takedown of 3 Me-262 jets. That wasn't just a lucky break. That was discipline meeting opportunity. The Me-262 was the Nazis' secret weapon. Fast, sleek, terrifying, but not invincible. Not when you've got elite pilots who refuse to blink. Let's pause here for a second. Because by this point in the war, the Tuskegee Airmen had done more than just prove their worth. They'd dismantled an entire myth. That Nazi belief in racial superiority. Shot down over Italy. That American idea that black men weren't capable of technical or tactical excellence. Blown apart over Germany. But still, no parades. No front-page headlines. No generals singing their praises. When these men came home, they were often ignored, dismissed, or shoved back into the same broken system they'd left behind. And yet they kept showing up. Not just in there, but in the fight for civil rights. Some became activists. Others became instructors. Their very existence became part of the proof needed to challenge segregation and demand change. Their performance directly impacted the most powerful institutions in the country. When President Truman issued Executive Order 9981 in 1948 to desegregate the military, it wasn't just political pressure that made it happen. It was the results of the Tuskegee Airmen. The data, the missions, the survival rates, all of it. You can't argue with results. You can try. But when a unit that wasn't even supposed to succeed becomes one of the most effective forces in the entire war, your argument crumbles. But here's what hits hardest. For decades, this story wasn't told properly. It was buried, minimized, watered down. Black excellence in military history was often erased, or treated like a footnote. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen was kept alive mostly by veterans, historians, and communities who refused to let the truth die. That finally started to change in the 2000s. In 2007, more than 60 years after the first combat kill, Congress finally awarded the Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal. It was symbolic, yes, but important. It forced the country to say, in public, what had been true all along: these men were heroes. Not just in spite of racism, but because they faced it and still rose above. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also symbols. Symbols of what happens when talent is finally allowed to thrive. Of what's lost when prejudice takes the wheel. And of how much stronger a nation becomes when it stops kneecapping its own people. There's a line that runs straight from the Tuskegee Airmen to every modern military leader of color. Every astronaut. Every black pilot, commander, or general. That line is built on discipline, sacrifice, and the refusal to be boxed in. They didn't just kick open the door. They ripped it off the hinges. So if you're still here, listening to this story, thank you. Because keeping their legacy alive matters. Not as a relic of the past, but as a mirror to the present. A reminder of what's possible. And a challenge to keep asking, who are we still underestimating? Who's still being left out, overlooked, or sidelined by systems built on outdated lies? The Tuskegee Airmen weren't just fighting for bomber safety. They were fighting for truth. And they delivered. All right, let's keep going. Because the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen doesn't stop at medals, stats, or even presidential executive orders. It echoes through every inch of American history that followed. These weren't just soldiers who happened to be black. They were black men who changed what it meant to be a soldier in America. They cracked open the walls of segregation in one of the most rigid, conservative systems in the country, the U.S. military. And they did it not with protests or lawsuits, but with mission after mission, kill after kill, record after record. Cold, hard, Proof. It's one thing to defy expectations. It's another to obliterate them so thoroughly that even your enemies have to take a second look. German pilots initially mocked them. They saw the red tails and assumed it was a joke. That these inferior pilots couldn't possibly pose a threat. That the Nazis' own race-based ideology was somehow bulletproof. But when you've got entire bomber formations making it home in one piece, and German fighters getting shredded by these so-called inferiors, that facade crumbles fast. Those same pilots who sneered at them in the beginning started avoiding them in the air. That's how you know the tide turned not just in reputation, but in fear. The red tails became the storm cloud on the horizon. And yet, back home, the airmen had to fight a different battle. One without planes. After the war, these veterans returned not to honor parades or welcome home banners, but to the same segregated buses, schools, restaurants, and barracks they left behind. Think about that. You risk your life fighting the Nazis, and when you come home, you're still not allowed to sit at the front of the bus. Some of these men had hundreds of hours of combat flight time under their belts and couldn't even get hired as commercial airline pilots in the United States. Airlines simply wouldn't hire black men. Period. So, many of them either left aviation altogether or found roles training future pilots, passing on the knowledge that had once been so forcefully kept from them. Still, the seed had been planted. Their performance during the war couldn't be erased. The numbers didn't lie. The survivors who owed their lives to the red tails didn't forget. And more importantly, the young black kids watching didn't miss a thing. The Tuskegee Airmen proved something dangerous to the system, that when given the chance, black Americans didn't just match their peers, they could lead them. It's no coincidence that the civil rights movement began picking up momentum just years after their service. These men weren't just symbols of black excellence, they were living proof that the American dream, as it stood, was being gatekept for no good reason. They forced the country to confront an uncomfortable question: if these men could fly, fight, and lead at the highest levels under the most intense pressure possible, then what exactly was the justification for denying them full citizenship, full dignity, equal rights? There wasn't one. There never was. And the Tuskegee Airmen exposed that with every mission they flew. Let's talk about that 2007 Congressional Gold Medal one more time. Because that moment wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reckoning. Lawmakers stood before aging pilots, some in their 80s, and finally said what had gone unsaid for generations: we got it wrong. You were heroes the whole time, and we refused to see it. It's hard to hear applause through the noise of decades of silence. But that medal wasn't just for the men in that room. It was for every one of them who had been pushed aside, forgotten, or buried without the honor they deserved. And to this day, their story isn't just inspirational, it's instructional. Because it forces us to look at every system, every institution, and ask, who's being overlooked right now? Who's being told they don't belong? Who's being denied the tools, the trust, or the space to prove themselves? The Tuskegee Airmen already taught us the answer. Talent exists everywhere. Excellence exists everywhere. The question is whether the systems we build are designed to see it. Their legacy is in every integrated military unit, every black pilot flying today, every classroom that teaches this history not as a footnote, but as a turning point. They didn't ask for extra credit. They didn't need it. All they wanted was the chance to serve, the chance to fly, the chance to prove that their ability wasn't defined by the color of their skin but by the sharpness of their minds, the steadiness of their hands, and the courage in their hearts. And that they proved over and over again. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with us through this story. Give it a like if you felt the weight of what these men accomplished. Share this video with someone who's never heard the full story. And drop a comment below: how should their legacy continue to shape our future? What lessons do we still need to learn? And of course, subscribe if you want more stories that go beyond the surface and expose the real ones who changed the game. Because this isn't just history. It's a reminder, a warning, a blueprint, and a challenge.